hopefully it'll be fine.
Same with speed.
Yeah.
Yeah, please say something. So it's like, I'm not
I think the
gonna go
largest
straight
problem
up.
might be sound, because you guys are kind of talking down
Yeah,
and
that's
we're
sort of
so
what I
high
figured.
above you anyway,
Shut up.
so, or just like maybe
Shut
a
up.
pitch louder.
Shut up, team.
I'll be a little bit louder and see if that fixes it.
I know, right?
Cool.
Oh.
All right, is everybody good?
Yeah.
Wait.
Come in.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good. All right, I'm just. First, the framework of the interpretation. The judge should evaluate the debate through the lens of deconstruction. The judge should adopt a methodology that prioritizes hospitable action towards the other above calculated efficiency. Once again, the judge should evaluate the debate through the lens of deconstruction. The judge should adopt a methodology that prioritizes hospitable action towards the other above calculated efficiency. First, some observations on difference. One is that meaning doesn't come from anywhere. Language is structured upon systems of meaning which paradoxically can't be understood without language in and of themselves. Trying to figure out whether meaning or language came first is like you asking the question of the chicken or the egg too. Is that meaning is constituted through difference? Things don't mean anything in and of themselves, but rather they mean things only in relation to something else. We first learn that there is something other than the self when we look in the mirror and understand that the I is only something that is in relation to something, which means that words only mean something in contextualization with other things. Three is objectivity is impossible, or we will never know what it's like to be anything but the particular beings that constitute ourselves, which means that any metaphysical claim is interrupted by our attempt to make it intelligible. This means that our politics and ethical regimes are ultimately insufficient to grapple with the complexity of the way in which the world is structured around us. Four is that violence equals the universalization of the particular. It displaces the different through which we constitute the particular and make it a homogeneous extension of the same. We would say that every single action has violence, but the worst form of violence is not taking responsibility for the actions that we do, or for the violence that we do commit. Five is that deconstruction is a form of continual self-criticism of identifying subjective limits and pressing beyond them. This means that our work is never finished in our project, or our project will ultimately derive momentum from the dissatisfaction that we see in the world around us. Six is that this round matters. The battle produces and legitimizes truth claims. Just voting for the 1AC is more than voting for the PMC, in the same way that voting for the negative is also voting for the counterclaim, the impact framework, the link, then notions of competition and all other justifying principles. We say that you should have to evaluate their methodology beyond their particular ethos, thus the efficacy. The United States federal government should enact H.R. 746, the Animal Research Endeavors Act, as a form of deconstructing the human. Once again, the United States federal government should enact H.R. 746, the Animal Research Endeavors Act, as a form of deconstructing the human.
You have BI.
No, we will not.
We told you all that.
Cool.
The advantages and specters of humanism. One is that the foundational distinction between politically valuable and invaluable life occurs at the creation of the human and non-human subject in which the human is protected by the rule of law and guaranteed inalienable rights, while the non-human is the body that can be relegated to the dinner plate. The little a is that the Aware Act is part and parcel of a regime that distinguishes between the human and non-human and invites the question of what it means to be an animal in and of self, when the actual reality is that every human is just a form of the form of that animal body, and the form of that human body in the first place. Because that this points out the appalling contradictions of the Aware Act. It's a bill that attempts to incrementally improve the condition of life for animals that are trapped in agricultural research facilities that are stripped of their autonomy for science and the greater good, which points out the devious nature of the humanist paradigm, which creates categories of acceptable loss and devaluation of particularized beings like those that are trapped within the factory farm industry. Two is that the humanist paradigm has created a unique ordering of history that is violent and tied towards animal research efforts like the Aware Act. Little a is that the Tuskegee experiment was an experiment that was used in which 600 rural Alabamans were injected with syphilis to test for the natural progression of the disease, and they were told that it was just free testing, but rather the scientists retroactively justified it by saying that the black body was no different than the cattle that they had traditionally done their scientific experiments on. The B argument is that factory farming is a logical end goal of the humanist hierarchy. It not only creates a site for animal research and testing, but also causes us to be able to hold animals captive, and also routinizes their mechanized slaughter for the basis of human consumption. This twists the utilitarian paradigm to be able to constantly justify atrocities. The D arguments that this culminates in a violent anthropocentrism that allows for unrelenting trauma and violence to be justified through casting animality upon beings, which filters their value, and which then filters their value. We must be open to the non-human in a way that would be able to disrupt these conflagrations of the humanist catastrophe. That's the impact framework. First is that calculations mean no future. The one is that it reduces the future to an extent. Calculations mean no future. One is that it reduces the future to an extension of the same change and entails expression of difference in the way in which we can understand time. We would say that the way in which we try to make calculations makes time contingent upon a living on, which nullifies the potential value of the future to come. Two is that there is no status quo. We can never exhaustively describe the status quo, which means that we always leave out contradictions to our calculations in the way in which we can conceive of those logical biases. This creates a confirmation bias in which we arrive at the exact same conclusions that we sought out to see because we leave out contradictions. I'll get to you at the bottom. Three is that this shuts out difference, which the little a is that this is key to value of death. Death impacts being the question of why be alive in the first place. Life is only valuable through openness towards the other. The argument is that life without difference is worse than no life at all. Reduces it to a repetition of the same in which the life is just a mere extension, exhausting repetition that devoids the life of its actual value. C is that commensuration equals determination. I will get to you at the bottom. This causes calculations allows the other to be manipulated and discarded and seen as containers of value, which allows for massive violence to be committed upon them. Four is that the humanist paradigm causes massive violence. Little a is that speciesism. 56 billion non-humans are killed every single year for consumption. This is 3,000 every second. You should evaluate this as an ongoing genocide and extinction level event that occurs every single day. The V arguments that this causes endless war. The little a is that they're actually, yeah, I don't need that.
Okay.
Yeah, what's up?
Can you give us a thesis of your criticism and then tell us whether you defend the future?
And also, like, make it very simple.
Yes, the thesis of the criticism is we think that there is a category of human that has created a category of non-human. We think that binary is bad. We deconstruct that through the 1AC. We will defend that the future is something that is good. Solvency, the affirmative takes a leap of faith for radical alterity. The first argument is that our ethics of non-humanity is an ethic of understanding that we're all socialized animals and that we're all socialized animals and that we are all and that non-humans are the exact same political subjects as we are. We point out the empirical, we point out the way in which these categories have been established by the humanist paradigm. And we critique that logic too is that deconstructing the human allows for us to embrace an ethic of empathy with non-human and meditate upon the unspeakable violence that constitutes their existence. Currently, we deconstruct the anthropocentric logic which culminates itself into violent speciesism. Three is that aporias or paradoxes are important because they allow us to think of new forms of subjectivity and allows for radical transformative potential of our politics to come forward. Is after the completely these politics we affirm not as a simplification of the way in which the world is, but as an opening to the future to come. We say that we must be able to embrace these politics. We must be allowing. What does it say? We would say that every single political action that doesn't attempt to do so eradicates its transformative potential. Five is that complexity should not justify complacency and just for rationalizing in action because of contrived dissent assumes a politics of purity rather than a politics of possibility. These six arguments that our work is never done. The affirmative justifies itself by coming to grapple with contradictions of solvency obstacles. And instead, we say that instead of trying to create the world as something that is a smooth space, we rather try to be open towards everything.
And then I'm gonna have some arguments at the top of the case. It's kind of like a case now. What? They probably make more sense on the advantage.
Okay.
I have one on a different sheet of paper that's
Yeah,
also.
no problem.
Sorry, so 3 off and then the advantage and then the framework, or 3 off the framework and then the advantage?
I'm not gonna specifically talk about the framework. You good?
First interpretation of the affirmative is not to defend the delimitation of plain action, but schools are absolutely negative within 5 minutes of topping out, so they not defend fiat, the schools are absolutely negative within 5 minutes of topping out violation. They do not defend fiat, you must disclose your advocacy. If you do not defend fiat, you must disclose your advocacy. It's negative within 5 minutes of topping out fiat. Standards won't say inclusivity. They can be literally anything against the tools they work to defend the top of it, or defend fiat, but that doesn't mean that they can literally defend anything within the resolution. It means they would not perfect. We've done this is super unfair. This is a type of exclusion they try to resolve in a different degree, but same time, this is reason doesn't down the argument's education only happens the game not disclosed because it gives you good surprises. We say this person don't want to have the debate about the best liberation, or they're just doing this to win rounds, to judge performance, to just solve nothing. Emporia, Louisville, and KC couldn't solve your speech out noise insufficient deal. Result is also into the bad arguments. You just want to play God debate instead of engaging on it. Only next argument is solve all your offense. We allow you to read anything we say you have to disclose your advocacy to us. We're not also we don't link to a passing. We're not saving your academics. This stage not watching us. The impacts of motor or inclusivity and education. The A-barrier, but issue running the interpretation to avoid judgment intervention. Next framework. interpretation of the affirmative must defend the accurate resolution. The affirmative must defend the accurate resolution violation. They actually don't say first standards to the topic.
Oh, sorry, they must defend fiat is the interpretation one.
When we say the topic matters, when we say it's the only locus for predictability in this vein of world where they can read literally anything, then we are just allowed to be able to read any kind of dissent or anything other than about the political implications, planning to destroy this education, also destroy topic research, not really to think about the political implications of the possible dissents that we read in a world where you don't use this key instrument education, you absolutely destroy also say it's bad fairness because you can literally determine whatever your ask is going to be, whatever the negative is going to be, responding to you can determine whatever we have to defend, as far as defend things like settler colonialism, good or racism, good because they can read whatever they want, and the affirmative is probably bad. All the education and fairness of the argument is role playing essentially good. The way that you talk about the structures necessarily exist, and the only way that you can think about them, the only way to break them down is understand the way that we work. That means we get prerequisite to understand criticism and the way that you can actually solve the affirmative. Also, we say that you actually ignore the violence in the topic. There's ongoing violence against with capitalism. You simply ignore the principle is also instead just thinking you just want to have a thought experiment about the way that we continue to deconstruct things about there's too bad there didn't actually do anything. It's like for actions. The next time you destroy discourse, you just want to monologize discourse. Peter Morrison of Northwest University says the same logic to totalitarianism where the one correct means thinking you don't want to contradiction by the other side. You say you don't necessarily justify this ideology. The next argument sequencing, you say we have to have free theoretical assessment of implementation of policy before we can have an understanding of the way that we actually feel effective the topical version of the athlete is you necessarily reject the next argument which I debates also they often say they want to reject the resolution good, they should do that in the negative, they should flip the angle. The argument the next argument is you see the political we say debate space as can allow for the imagination of political change in the status quo, but the link is you destroy the you just want to talk about the constant deconstruction of the political and everything else wrong. You know, be able to say conservative forces feel entirely super bad because they then we think global warming is alive as long as you recreate all the impacts you isolate because they just won't do things to check back to global warming, which destroys it leads to extinction of all species. The next argument is probably it leads to the most likely cause of warming. Say they would probably break down barriers and the next one is you are an impossible man. You are literally the liberal university professor that just sits back and you are literally just sitting back and like criticizing everything without actually taking any action. We say that is just the ideology that we definitely have to that we never have to give up our privilege. We can just say everything is wrong and just let us from actually engaging in really any kind of real change whatsoever. Let's say dooms your after no solvency the ours to vote for education, parents voting to interpretation to avoid judgment eventually a priority. Thesis. The affirmative says morality, the world morality is not exist as well as the bills of truth, the false and the laws of society, the inherent condition of life only save us up the moral imperatives, we suffer for sake of truth and core of the world according to the imperative imperatives links. What refusal to blame the constant calls to saying that it is the problem of that the isolated status quo is the problem of past government actions to refuse to be able to question things the idea that it's someone else's fault and that we don't have to be take action for the second argument is they necessarily the creation of a false god, they necessarily probably constant deconstruction of the way we can constantly break things down. We say that individuals who are given life through this is you isolate literally everyone that probably is trying to pay back to God for the life that He has given us, but we can never do that. The next argument is you attempt to control the world. Simply think about having this thought experience about deconstruction, we can break down all his perception. Yeah, what's the question?
What do you define as a moral imperative?
We said like that is the
What is a moral imperative?
Like a lot of the arguments your advocacy say literally this is the best way to solve it. You say like ethics are a prior question to anything else. Kyle
impacts.
When we say no matter life, first of all, the individual self-denial value, constantly the recreation of the same ideology for everyone, the elimination of difference is necessarily going to be bad. We say that individuals in society's elimination of value life for themselves. The next term is the other's loss of value, the necessity that we have to act on behalf of the other necessarily results in their the belief that the other cannot embrace and fix the problems for themselves, necessarily results in them having to own value life. The next term is talks about the failures to never resolve all the impacts that you isolate about, like all the problems with the essentially probably means you're only going to recreate the very impacts you isolate because we're filled with we lash out against the other, we lash out against the animal because we blame him as being a failure. Because all this probably turns case in and results in no solvency for the app.
The alt. Reject the affirmative ethical imperative. Or vote next, reject the affirmative ethical imperative. Vote next, reject the affirmative ethical imperative. Solvency when we say the also Paul Gas allows us to reconceptualize the world beyond the ethics of self-sacrifice. Behavior allows us to reconceptualize the world and activism in the outside morality and allows the reconstruction of a new ability to resolve this. We can solve the entirely affirmative only question of the way to justify problems. We can solve the entirely next argument is the answer to perm. We say perm is going to asking you and your inclusion in the criticism necessarily means that we just recreate the exact moral imperatives we isolate as being problematic. The argument is we are filled with the greater degree of resolve because we have the ability to escape these problematic moral imperatives, but the inclusion of one of them necessarily means that we're going to recreate, which means that we are only closer and we couldn't actually get out of it. Yeah. Next. We see anthros never, you can never check back from the one argument is the species never going to eat each other. It's probably an example why there's always going to be a hierarchy. Humans are literally at the top of the food chain, true miscommunication. We can never talk with other things, problems, we can never fix that. The third argument is we debate is naturally anthropocentric. There's a reason there's no animals in this room right now in the way, there's no reason we can discuss them. The fourth argument is the idea of anthropocentrism is naturally created in the idea of the human. We don't know whether monkeys think anthropocentrism is a real thing. We know that problem is you are non-possible, you shouldn't root, and then also you can't turn back time. We isolate the creation of anthropocentrism was rooted in the Neolithic revolution over 50,000 years when people came to mean no
longer nomads. Next term, the answer is not through cause. We isolate. We can still be violent even when we endorse animals. We isolate the example of ancient Egypt, but literally propped up cats as being more important than humans. And yes, they still had slaves. It's probably 20 bad. Second term, we isolate the Gaelic Islands. Quickly, they thought that all living things were necessarily viable and inherently useful, and we shouldn't kill them. But they still had injured Irish shores. Were probably some of the Czech pathos also say religion necessarily occurred before, religion occurred before the creation of the anthropocentrism and necessarily created alternative forms of difference and violence. The next, we say answer is definitely good. One of the arguments keys to the economy over $100 billion in the US economy are due to agriculture industry. You destroyed all this. Probably these economic classes going to global class extinction faster. Two arguments we say is key to food production. You destroying food for all humans probably going to lead to this. The next argument we say is key check out for warming. If we can't think about the world in different ways, we can't resolve warming. We say warming we never resolve extinction. The next argument we say is key to giving human rights whatsoever. All ethics-based systems are based on seeing humans as something different than animals. They say that, okay, on to the one argument framework. They say like objectivity is impossible. We say there is a level of having, like, yes, objectivity is impossible. We can be more objective or less objective. Subjectivity is not the same in and of itself. Also, we say, you can make similar examples to why they're not going to be the root cause. Well, can't check back these on really the impacts. We say, first of all, the future is probably a bad way to look at this. They say the future is inherently anti-queer because we create ourselves based on the ability to prop up future generations. Probably say that results in terminal elimination of the queer. Probably turns case because it's also justification that leads to the elimination of things like animals. They say that we are the key value of life and its elimination of the status quo. We say that if we win the Christian probably turns this also, we can still have value of life. We isolate like things like debate or have family, probably check back this also. There's not a constant extinction that's occurring in the status quo. It's just a lie. You should not preference these claims. They say deconstruction can solve back these things. With empathy, we say empathy cannot solve things. I feel empathetic for my dog, but that doesn't mean I don't still go eat meat, which probably means you have terminal solvency. Also, you say they're just going to constantly do more. We say that your advocacy is simply to do the resolution as it means, breaking it down strongly. You're not going to lead to the endless deconstruction that you necessarily isolate. It is a one and only thing. You say that paradoxes are going to be good. Paradoxes are going to probably have no ability to solve the solvency because you don't explain what you do once you have finished the paradox. You just see things as constantly opposed to one another and never actually do anything.
Okay, let me keep on top in order, and then, or actually, put disclosure on top. Disclosure on top, and then it'll be the framework debate, which will be I will answer their specific framework with, and then talk about our framework. Try to make it as clear as possible, but I have them on two separate sheets, so I do apologize for that. And then it'll be the app straight down, and then the critique.
One more time, sir.
What?
One more time, disclosure.
Yeah, so disclosure on top, and then it'll be the framework debate. I have the frameworks on separate sheets, so I will talk about, I'll answer there specifically and try to make this as clean as possible, and then I will talk about our framework, and then the rest of the app straight down, and then the critique. Is that good?
Thank you.
Okay. First on disclosures is we BBC statute told you by that there is surrounding will not defend fiat, and you did not ask for anything else means that you did not define what disclosure means free rounding, that there's no real ability for us to answer that. You say the disadvantage to your interpretation is that you don't tell us what we need to disclose until the roundage means theory becomes overpowering in the debate, which ruins all of your education claims. The next counter interpretation we need to disclose, we created a disclosure document that we made as we did. We say this solves all of your impacts because it shows the prep for chaos. We say that you can literally look at us and say that we see that we read Darrow 5 times, anti-blackness twice, call 9 times, and policy 21 times. That narrows your ground to 3 acts if we say we don't defend fiat, which is better for you in that world. The next is the counter interpretation we should disclose during the PMC. We obviously mean this because we disclose. We said neg prep is always going to be generic and is key to classes. There's a side bias for the neg. You can see that everyone flips negative. The next is the counter interpretation. You say that it is only voluntary disclosure. This solves paternalism and solves all of your offense because you should not have to try to receive disclosure for other schools. Next is the Darrow impact turns all of disclosure. We say that we cannot know the other, which you concede. Disclosure closes off ourselves to difference because you need us to tell you disclosure proper. That was dumb. They say inclusivity, anything within the resolution. We say that we told you that we were not going to defend fiat means that you probably have access to this. Anything within the resolution means that our disclosure document checks back for this. You say exclusion is tricky to try to resolve this. You say that you shouldn't be like, you have complete access. We told you we were going to talk about the topic. We talked about it where we were going to say that it's your fault that you did not try to understand. You say that we also say that you have no right to know exactly what the app is going to do. Even if we write a policy app, there's no way for you to know how we parametricize the app means there's no link differential between a K app and a policy app, especially in a world where we have a disclosure document that tells you the 4 K apps we read means that you can probably look at that with a direction arrow. And next to say you say that this is education of surprise. We say that there's probably a surprise in and of education, or surprise is probably educational in and of itself. Also, so the topic area determinant already solved for any of your education claims means that we provide unique education in roundings. And the next is that you say something about Casey of our counter-interpretations solve all of your offense means you have no game on disclosure. Is that good?
You should say reasonability.
Oh, you should evaluate this through the lens of reasonability. We say that reasonability does not lead to judge intervention. It just means that you have to win every standard and prove in-round abuse and meet our counter and answer all of our counter-interps. We should have had to make the debate impossible for you. You still read your critique. Probably means we didn't. Framework. You say that we have to defend fiat, but all of our answers on disclosure answer this back. We told you we were going to defend fiat. Means that there is no reason why this framework is abusive. You can flow across our framework about the descriptive value and deconstruction of and hospitable action over calculative efficiency. You say that the topic matters. We say that we talk about the topic. We talk about the way that a WARE Act is used to paper over anthropocentrism and the distinction between the human and the non-human. Means that we probably talk about the topic. Fiat is not key to talking about the topic. Means this standard does not matter. We say that you also concede all of our framework arguments about how meaning is structured through language and through difference. Means that none of this matters for you in the first place. You say this is bad for fairness. We're going to say that not only do we you're not pulling an impact turn to this. We say there's enough fairness in the world where we already disclose you. Disclosure means that this does not matter. We're also going to say that you could cross apply most of our disclosure arguments onto here. You say role-playing, labeling is good. You say that you should not force us to role-play as a racist government or as a government that we do not believe in. Means that you should not force us into role-playing. It's just a question of creativity and flexibility on the affirmatives, which is a unique form of education. You say that we ignore the violation of the topic, something about capitalism. We talk about the topic in our own way. You should not try to prescribe how we talk about the topic. That is fascism. That is a program of ethics that you critique and that we critique. Means that they are inflicting a program of ethics on us. It's how we should act in this round. Means that they link into the critique as well as the affirmative by reading this. You say that we destroy the logic of totalitarianism. We say the logic of totalitarianism is reading disclosure and framework and telling us that we can only operate in this round if we operate how you want us to operate. And we say that that means it turns any of your totalitarianism arguments. We give you plenty of fair access to this round through all the counter-interps on disclosure. Means that you have no abuse here. You say switch side debate solves. We say that that is a trying to program us into what we already expect to happen. That is a foreclosure of the future that we critique on the app because we expect critiques to happen on the negative. That forecloses the future means that critiques only happen on the negative, which eliminates value to life. Means that there is a disadvantage of the entire affirmative to switch side debate. You say see the political. We say see the political is the status quo. We say that this is you say constant deconstruction will check back global warming. You can see too much on the cases why that is true. Most close. You say sit back and decay everything. We are not a sit back and decay everything. We are a question of how we reevaluate ourselves to ethics that happens in the status quo. We say bonus for fairness in education. We say this is not a voter for fairness in education because they already answered fairness in education on the disclosure thread. Means that there's no reason why you should vote for this reasonability. Our framework. You concede all of our framework about how the objectivity is impossible. Means that you can float it across. You say that there is not the root cause. Means that you have no articulation as to the other root cause. We say that it is a human and a non-human. None of your other articulations matter. Where you see and is inevitable. We say that the act is not even true in the world of the affirmative. You say that they eat each other, but that is not a question of prioritization. That is a question of life. You say humans are top of the food chain. Probably articulation of anthro. You say the debate is anthropocentric because we are not. There's no animals in this room. Our articulation that we are all animals. Means there are animals in this room. You say that anthro is human nature and we can't turn back time. You're going to say that that is just the instantiation of how anthro works. We think that we are above everyone else. You say self-root cause because there's still violence. That's the creative pieces of the affirmatives. All of our actions create violence. It's a question of whether we are open to the other. Means that it's not a distant violence. It's not a question of that. It's a question of our orientation. That good card. Before I go to the next. Sorry, it's on my pad. They say religion occurred first. We say we're probably a critique of religion because religion is a program of ethics. We critique a program of ethics through the affirmative. It means that we probably solve back for that. You say all these arguments about key to the economy. Look, our entire act is a criticism of these arguments. The idea of calculative future predictions is what we critique because you concede that we always leave someone out, which means that your calculation is wrong and does violence. It's a question of how we orient ourselves to the other in the first place. None of that matters. You say future.
No status quo.
No status quo. You say future is anti-queer. We're going to say that the future is inevitable. That looking towards the future is what we do as we live on. And queer still wants to live on. And we're going to say that an openness to the queer body solves for any of the impacts of that because it allows us to create technology that allows them to reproduce. Means that that's probably a reason why this doesn't matter. They say that empathy doesn't solve because you're a dog. You like your dog, but you eat meat. You don't eat your dog. Means that we probably solve for that. Good. Flow across solvency. You say there's not endless deconstruction. It ends with one thing. You concede all of our solvency about the leap of faith and an ethic of empathy that goes outside of this round that deconstructs anthro, which means that deconstructs other things, because it does not just end here. You say no solvency because what do we do afterwards? We are an articulation of how we orient ourselves to ethics. Means it goes out. Nietzsche. First, you say false God. We're going to say that we are not a false God. Our argument is not that we should know the other or demonize violence. We say that this is a fault. We say that we look at the face of impossibility and try to respond to difference. This is a reductionist. You also link to this because your alternative is a false God. It is means to solve responsibility. So there's no link differential here. The next is ethical teleology. We say, we reject this. We reject the history of ethics. Our organization should be responsible to difference and recognize that we should know. We can't know the other, but we should try. We say the recognition is constituted by the other and violence towards the self. We critique the entirety of this. They say that we are in turn that ethics can be good. It's a question of how we orient it. You are a question of ethical. You are critiquing ethical programming, which is what we critique. Ethical imperative is programming. We try to resolve that. alternative. First is permutation. Vote F, choose the plan, reject ethical imperatives. Vote F, choose the plan, reject ethical imperatives. There is no competition here because, no, don't have time, sorry. There's no competition here because the affirmative is a critique of program of ethics, which is what they critique means that we are in line with them. There's no reason why we cannot prove this. They say that it masks, but it does not mask in a world of the affirmative. They have no explanations why this is true. In the affirmative, in a world of deconstruction, they can see that on framework means that there's no reason that we cannot permute this. We say the also does not solve because it rejects ethics means that it reads all the impacts of the affirmative. We say that rejecting ethics is bad. It's a question of how we orient ourselves to ethics, and we have conceded that orientation to ethics is good means that there's no way for you to solve the impacts of the affirmative or the critique because you are also a false god means that there's no link differential between the two of us means that we can solve for all the impacts of the negative by reorienting ourselves to ethics in a better way.
There is going to be disclosure, criticism. Briefly on the AF, and then further.
I'm sorry.
Briefly on the AF. Does that include the AF framework?
Yeah.
Sorry, so it's...
I'm gonna be referencing the AF, so it's mostly.
Okay, sorry, so it's disclosure, and then, is it the AF?
Disclosure, the critique, our critique.
Sorry.
Briefly on the AF, I'll go straight down and just be flagging a few arguments.
And then framework brings them up. Got it.
There will be an overview of the speech. Is everybody ready? No counter-interpretation on our framework arguments and reasons why we were able to solve the switch side debate indicate your voting preference against the only out they have is weighing the affirmative against the framework in the world. We are going to be winning that this question of proximate ethics, question of understanding within this round. We are going to be best for this. Go to disclosure. We're not going to disclosure. You can extend across. They do not have to. They do not have to disclose their advocacy. This problem is that we get all of our arguments about predictability. There's no way we can know what advocacy they will read, nor is there no way we can know what offense they will read. I'll go to their arguments on the voter level. First, you say fair enough, and that's the best. And they say the critical education good because creativity. We say one, you were able to be creative for topic gaps indicator. No, the bright line. Two, we say you were able to be creative on the negative indicator. Switch side, be able to solve after creativity. Three, no reason why critical creativity is any more or less important. Four, no prioritization. No reason why this is uniquely beneficial. We say it's a question of fairness because fairness. You cannot have a debate without fairness. Indicate that when in a world we are going to win that lack of fairness collapses debate, you're going to be voting for us on this question. Also, we say we are not able to adequately engage in gain education because we are not able to engage with you because it indicates you're going to be perfectly good on this question. Also, you say reasonably because we have to win all standards. It's a trivially easy standard to meet. They could literally just read 8 standards that are all bad and could concede one of them because there's too many of them and they would always win. And keep just about it assesses that you would always allow for cheating means that their standard for reasonability is bad. In a world where this is true, you default to competing interpretations. In a world where they do not have competing interpretation on framework, it's just game over.
They say we have to prove in round abuse.
They say we have to prove in an abusive world. We say it is a bad standard for debate because we didn't know we can evaluate in round abuse when we did not read our TSAT. We're not going to read a position that doesn't link indicates the bad way to engage in debate. Also, the fact that we had to read generics and we were able to know link it indicates it's true. Also, we expected them to read other positions. We prep for settler colonialism. We prep for anthro. We not read those because you read this instead indicates that this is the reason why. This is the reason why we would never be able to solve. Actually, we didn't really prep for anthro. We prepped for something different. But anyway, that's the exact point. Go to the criticism. This argument was conditional. They say we link to this position. We say conditionality is good for a few reasons. First, we say it's key to check outside bias. After the first last speech, made 7 minutes on against attack from 5 on time to get these stands to think defendant. Also, we say conditionality is good because we able to test affirmative multiple levels. Otherwise, you never know whether the plan is a true idea. In addition, they don't really need offense as to why conditionality is bad. Indicates you should not validate the links to the arguments they make. They're saying we link. Also, we say we don't link it as far as we say this would probably just been us asserting our own will to power and saying we need to be able to solve after this one instance. Go to the affirmative. Sarah does not do nearly enough work on this argument. We say you are not going to be able to solve after the root cause of anthropocentric mean you're not going to be able to deconstruct that nor be able to solve it. Then across the litany of arguments Cal makes today, those are only marginally. They say we prioritize humans, which is best. We say you cannot communicate with the other and cannot communicate with animals specifically means that you're not going to be able to solve after your affirmative indicates your totalizing arguments are going to be wrong. Also, then across the argument by even our root cause by each thing, the qualities are going to be devastating for you because we say even if when you prioritize animals over humans, you're still able to commit violence. Indicates your arguments that the root cause of violence are just wrong. And also then across the Gaelic war where they did not believe that killing anyone was good except humans indicates that it's not a question of anthropocentric nor is it a question of not viewing people as other, but it's a question of, but it indicates your root cause claims are wrong. These are indictments. Your solvency indicates in a world where they are going to try and leverage the criticism against the framework, even if we link, they're not able to solve, which is the reason why there is logic is flawed. Also, probably indicates that the criticism to begin with. You say you were critiquing religion. We say it's not a question of critiquing religion or not. It's a question of pre-orientations. And we say religion was a prerequisite, but still caused these things to happen. Also,
Extend across the argument that they are critiquing their interpretation. Extend across that they are not empathetic because of our dog analysis. Well, actually, that's fine. That's sufficient. If they cannot solve the root cause of the critique, it means they cannot leverage it as offense because they have no alternative. Go to framework. Extend across our interpretation that the affirmative must defend fiat and implementation of the plan. Extend across the one argument is the locus predictability. You say you do not defend framework that and fiat, but that did not solve any of our offense. Our offense is about not knowing what efficacy you read. You say you have 4 affirmatives and you read. Fine, that makes we have to not bifurcate our prep, but read prep 4 different answers to their affirmatives. Indicates it makes it impossible for us to engage in impossible for us to articulate why they are wrong. This kills our education and ability to be able to engage in this round. Further, the final argument Kyle reads, the 1C argument indicates that they force us to defend unethical ground. This is the way place you pull the trigger right here because they are able to define what ground when there's no stable locus. It's not merely a question of what happens in this round, what happens in any round. If they're able to define beyond the resolution, define beyond fiat, they're able to say, all right, we say racism is bad. Go, Neg, try and compete with that. That makes it impossible for us to engage. That forces us to defend unethical advocacy. That's going to be outweigh your criticism regardless of whether you have the pre or post fiat. If not, you say fair, you say we are linguistic. You are framework is linguistic, and a critique of this, we say there's no reason why the linguistic critique or nor reason why it's not true. Indicates you are not going to be turning this. You are an impact turning fairness. You we say one impact turning fairness problem collapses debate because there's no we can engage in a world where it's not fair. It makes the game impossible. 2, we say we are also having education standards which are beneficial. We indicate classically internal to education. Otherwise, it becomes a speech event. Indicates we cannot indicate the criticism. Also, you can cross-apply the analysis that we make, saying you cannot solve the root cause of everything we write. It's like a bunch of critical teams that have read these things, and the scholar you critiquing in the first place indicates you cannot claim root cause and say that you were able to solve that for all of these things. Also, you say racist government. Also, you say go to role-playing arguments. Instead of role-playing, we do not need one. You say racist governments are bad, problematic. We should not be forced to role-play your oppressor. We say there's one. We are not role-playing your oppressor. You are changing your oppressor. You are imagining and conceiving of a world in which you were able to redefine the way that the government's changed. That's why you're not defending status quo. That's why you're defending other thing, other change to the government. Also, we say it's a question of justification. You were able to justify the government actions in a different way. Indicates no unique office. You're also saying this is the logical fascism because you force us to. There's no warrant to why this is logical fascism. Rather, we say it's fascist for you to exclude us from the round and not allow us any kind of predictability in this debate. Also, we say in the world where you are in a world where we are running on one stand about how you kill our ability to be able to focus on the locus of predictability and kill our ability to be able to engage in debate right adequately because the ground indicates all this is the reason why we're going to be turning the stand because you are fascist. Also, you say we linked your own criticism. I've already answered this on the other sheet of paper. You say you are totalitarian because you force us to monolize knowledge, but this third standard is an impact to our 1C argument. We say when we lose the ground, we force us to defend unethical ground. When you force us to defend unethical ground, force us not to have a debate, force us out of this round, this allows for totalitarianism because they don't want to have a discussion, they don't want to have a back and forth engagement, rather they just want the speech act and the 1AC where they juke us and say you don't get to solve back for things indicates that this is going to be bad because it forces us to not be able to have offense. You say we are next extended constitution debate solves going to be able to solve our offense. You say it's a question of having a case on the after the negative, but why is this true? We say we affirmative could defend the topic, and then you can read this criticism on the negative indicate the majority of your offense is solved in the world where we are winning arguments from the disclosure shell. You can look, it's the 3, you can look, it says specifically that all discussion criticism doesn't mean you solve the root cause because you haven't figured everything out. Our AF claims arguments on the AF prove this. It means they cannot leverage their affirmative as a reason why we do not solve everything. Indicates this is the reason why you do not need to read it on the app as a beneficial way. Also, get how?
Extend the 4C argument says there's a topical version of their app.
Also, within across the argument on sequencing indicates that the 4C argument that there's a topical version of their affirmative indicates that's probably solved that for all of their offense. They could have read the plan and then said this was a way of deconstructing, but instead they said do not defend fiat and no linked our ground indicates they probably would have solved that for all of their offense. Means all their offense is just wrong. Also, you said only the negative can read critiques the problematic method to be able to evaluate the method of the debate are the sequencing argument and the topical version of your affirmative able to solve all of your offense. Also, you say the static quo. Also, you say political is already seated, but we say political is not seated because fiat reclaims the political. It is the literal definition of acting and saying we must act indicates our see the political arguments both reasons why you do not evaluate their affirmative, their criticism against the case because we say when in a world where you see the political, you are literally scholars who dared us saying these things are bad but not doing anything is the reason why this is true. You were going to go for final also extend across the argument about a possible ban. You say we are not impossible because you only act within this round, but it's an argument about Zizek saying we demand things are bad but we don't do anything. Yes, we recognize we can change, but this doesn't lead to change. It just leads to us saying, okay, the problem's solved, we solve Anthro, and going home. Finally go to the voters. Extend across the argument that competing interpretation is the best way to evaluate debate. They have no counter-interpretation on this. Their counter-interpretation of the affirmative is not going to be sufficient because it's not give them access to a critique indicates in a world where we are winning dispatch reasonability is you would always flip for us. Also, you say that reasonability is not create judging intervention. It does create judging intervention because what is reasonable, what is not is subjective. There's no way we can know what that's true. You say there's no such thing as also in a world where briefly go to their framework. They're going to leverage this argument that there's no such thing as objectivity and that's bad. Kyle reads the argument that it's linear and they concede it, indicates it's a question of the spectrum and therefore you cannot leverage this offense. Also, their interpretation is about deconstruction and hospitality, not about theory, indicates you pull the trigger on theory if you think competing interpretation is best. Also, you can extend across the voters. We say this collapses debate and we're going to be best for education because clash is the internal link to said education.
Okay. Give me an overview, framework. I have a bunch of arguments on the voters, specifically on the disclose sheet. So when I go to the voters, that'll be at the bottom of the framework, and I'm going to do a lot of cross applications from the disclose sheet. I will also reference their framework in a couple places. Is everyone good?
Perfect.
Real bad for you when you concede with two arguments that are hidden in our framework shell, which just make it devastating for you. That you did force us to defend horrific ground, and there is a topical version of your act which probably solves almost all of your offense. Those two concessions, which you should not allow to read in the PMR, are brutal for you. If you vote on being interpretation, the lack of one that actually competes with ours is going to be bad. Go to our standards now. I specifically want the argument that you can determine whatever ground you want to have and whatever ground we are forced to have. That is just case that literally you can read whatever you want on the app and then we have to defend the opposite. That means that you can just stand up and say racism's bad, and then what do we have to say? We have to say racism's good. We say, first of all, that is a bad internal to education because it means it forces us to defend messed up things. We say that's probably something bad and it's probably not something we should do in the debate space. Also, we say that's a key internal into fairness because in a world in which we have to defend and we cannot have a fair debate in the world unless we want to read these messed up things. It's probably going to be the best internal into both of these things. Also, yeah. Also, I want you to extend our third standard, which goes concede. We specifically say that they are the monologization of discourse. They are the idea that we should simply stand up at the PMC and read a 7 minutes speech act. They are the ideology of speech, but if they don't want to be questioned, they just want to read something as a total life and truth and just say that's going to be good. We say that that is the logic of facts, and you can look to Gary Morrison from Northwestern University. Evidence says this is the logic that Hitler and Milosevic and Serbia used, where he says that they said that there was one distinct truth and that they got people to go along with that. And this is the narrativization of one direct truth going to be bad. This probably turns all of their fascism arguments is always going to outweigh. We say you should, for our specificity of the warrants in this claim, any try to have like an explication as to how they are like we are fascist because they can't really absolutely bad, especially combined with our sequencing argument. Go there now. They concede this entire standard. There is not one piece of defense here. This is bad. Because our 4C argument on the sequencing still is there's top version of that. You could have read the affirmative, the advocacy, adjective, said you defended fiat, and then had a debate about the ways in which fiat is able to deconstruct things and the disads that we wanted to read in this debate. But you disallowed it from happening. That means that you disallowed us from reading any kind of disads whatsoever. That means that that is going to be, first of all, a total disad to your interpretation. That your interpretation has 0% probability of solving back for it. Because we're going to have to go for that you just want to deconstruct things, which necessarily precludes any kind of policy making whatsoever. Next. They might try to go for this argument that they exclude any kind of criticism in the app. Our topical version of the app argument probably checks back for this. You can read a critical justification for a planting. There is a reason why there are a bunch of people at this tournament so far that have read a top class about why we shouldn't test on primates like Washburn did in Elim too, and then said that that is key to breaking down the human-animal divide. You could have read anthropocentric impact under the world of the under a world of theaters. Probably checked back for also all your offense. We do not dislike from being able to read these things. We don't destroy any kind of education on this. Also, yeah, what's up?
They're going to try to make a bunch of new cross-sects for their case.
Oh, yeah, sure. They're going to try to make a bunch of new cross applications from the criticism. When we say in a world we win that there is penalty for a topical version of their app, you should not allow to do this. Also, I want you to extend the impossible man argument. They are literally the ivory tower that just gets to sit back and say the world is fucked up, but we're not going to do anything about it. We say that as a bad moral debate because it destroys any ability, first of all, to engage in fairness in the round because we don't discuss the political implications, but it's also devastating internally to education because it turns out after we graduate, most of us are going to go to be voters, possibly people involved in government. But we say that we like the ideology of their interpretation just means that we just go out and we say things are fucked up and then don't do anything about it. This is bad. You shouldn't allow them to do that. Go to the voters. They're going to go hard for reasonability and said that we were reasonably able to engage in this debate. But first of all, they don't solve our reasonability standard where their interpretation doesn't solve back for any of the arguments we read. Oh, yeah,
they explain their reasonability standards. We have to win one standard
somewhere.
somewhere.
Yeah. Also, they say they just have to win one counter standard somewhere. That's probably a terrible model of debate. You should always have to win more than one specific argument to be able to win this. Also, we say you inevitably result in judgment intervention. We are always going to be better for this. We are going to be better internally to fairness and education in this debate. They've excluded us unfairly. They didn't have to, but they did, and they should lose on forever because of it.
There will be an overview. Then it will be the disclosure sheet. Then the AF briefly. And then framework.
Does your AF discussion include the framework? That framework?
Yes. Everybody good?
Yep.
Two reasons you vote after the end debate. Unfortunately for you, all of your arguments in this debate is solved by all of the arguments that we make about disclosure. Your arguments about ground and driven forcing you to defend horrific arguments is solved by you asking what we read and actually specifying how far we must disclose, which would resolve all of your arguments in this debate. Makes it impossible for you to be able to say that we have to defend via because all of those arguments would be implicated by all of our disclosure arguments. Two is that the topical version of the affirmative locks us into a person of the same that prevents engagement with certain instances of the other and forces us to defend the exact sort of policy making that we say that does horrific things, which means that there's also no link differential between the horrific ground that you would establish in the way where you force us to defend policy making and it forces us into policy making apps, which causes us all to have to role play as a government that we think is genocidal, which prevents us from ever having an authentic engagement with the other. Means that the entirety of the 1AC is an impact to that argument. The counter interpretation is the framework that Sarah reads indicates that you do not have any unique offense here. Disclosure. I want you to extend across our arguments since the disclosure solves all of their offenses. This cross-application makes a lot of sense because it means that all of their arguments about how they were unfairly precluded in this debate is resolved by them just asking what the fuck we were going to read in the first place. That solves all of their offense, and the way in which we did disclose means that all of their arguments about why they did not get access to fiat is resolved in a world where they asked the question in the first place, would resolve all of their predictable education arguments as well as predictable limits, because there's only a certain amount of affirmatives that we would be able to read, which takes out all of their education arguments. You have also conceded the surprise education argument, which is going to be damning for you because surprise education indicates that even if a world where we don't defend fiat, the way in which we engage in clash, specifically when you do not expect it, is a crucial form of education that is precluded in a world where we have to constantly justify ourselves as policymakers, which is going to be the impact to the rest of the 1AC framework now. Extend across the interpretation. This is the counter-interpretation that we're going for on framework that the judge should evaluate the debate through the lens of deconstruction and adopt a methodology that prioritizes hospitable action towards the other above a calculated efficiency. This is best to have conceded that meaning and doesn't come from nowhere, but that is structured upon systems of language that are also paradoxically understood. Before we can even understand what it means to actually be topical, we have to be to be topical or understand language. We have to be able to understand the way in which meaning is constituted through difference, which means that you preclude the entirety of the 1AC from happening. The entirety of the 1AC is an impact to all of your arguments. It does not matter if objectivity is linear, because you would preclude certain forms of debate and also preclude us from engaging in certain forms of understanding the other in a way that destroys the radical potential of the 1AC, which means that Derrida is an impact to all of your education arguments in the way in which you would try to frame us out of this debate advantage. All of their anthro arguments are irrelevant. We will not go for those. Extend across the calculation means that the other becomes a container of value that can be rejected. We must be hospitable towards the other above all else you have conceded it. This means that in a world where your education is just ultimately founded upon policymaking, then policymaking precludes the other and turns it into containers of value. This is exactly what Sarah says when she says that the dissent towards your framework interpretation is that we are precluding an authentic engagement with the other, which causes extinction level impact, which takes out the entirety of the 1AC and also destroys all of your knowledge production. Means you do not have an impact at the end of the round. You have conceded solvency that says that we are able to complicate politics in a way that allows us to be open towards the other. It does not matter if we're open towards the animal, because we're open towards the other, which is something that policymaking precludes. Framework framework. Extend across our counter-interpretation, extend across the counter-interpretation that I've done before. All of your arguments about killing education is ultimately impacted by our argument that says that that you would prefer preclude an actual engagement with difference, because in a world where we had to defend fiat, then that precludes, then that locks us into policy mechanisms, which causes us to be trapped in a repetition of the same, where we have the exact same sort of debates and we are forced to justify genocidal government, which we lose every time you say that the government is bad. Means that there's not a link differential between the way in which you would be forced to defend bad arguments. This racism bad argument is nonsensical, because the government is racist. Means that anytime we were to be forced to defend the government, you would also link to this. Yes, Chairman.
They also concede that there is no difference between the predictability of a policy app versus a critical app, means that there is no difference.
They also concede that there's not a difference between the predictability of a policy app vis-a-vis a critical app, and that you do not have a right to actually know the entirety of the 1AC, which means that the in-round clash that would come about from those is the internal link between all of your education argument, and also means that fairness is arbitrary in this instance, that there's not an actual reason for why fairness would be inevitable in a world we read a policy app that was able to do all of the tricky things that you say. That would also link out of all of your offense. You have just go in on this fascism argument, but attempting to give us programs of the way in which we have to debate is the same form of fascism that says that we are locked into the totality of the way in which we would understand these arguments, and that would prevent us from being able to understand these arguments. What's there?
Answer switch side.
Oh, you say switch side debate good, but you would just preclude us from being able to debate in the first place. You would lock us into a repetition of the same that says that we have to be able to read the criticism on that side, and that you are creating the exact same form of ethical programming of debate and forms of authenticity testing that we critique through the entirety of the 1AC. This means that we have internally turned all of their fairness arguments, internally turned all of their education arguments. All of those are solved by them asking us to disclose, which we did, which would resolve all of their offense in this debate. They do not have a defense of policy-making framework outside of saying that we will eventually have our hands on the levers of power, but they've conceded that there's not a link differential in a world where policy-making links us to just as much atrocious offense as they would, which means that that's a reason for why you would never evaluate that. Even if you evaluate this through competing interpretations, I think we'd win, but we think, yeah, we just internal.